On a Malaysia Airlines flight, a male passenger was allegedly removed from the aircraft after claiming that he appropriately touched a flight attendant before takeoff. But here's a legal question. Can touching without force, injury, or violence still amount to battery under tort law?
Your Honor, this is not right! Your Honor, according to news report, a male passenger was allegedly accused of inappropriately touching a flight attendant. According to this news report, he was escorted off after being reported by the crew in this flight. Now, this raises an important legal issue under tort law. Your Honor, so now my counsel partner will help you with this.
We need to understand that in tort law, battery falls under trespass to person. Therefore, the key issue here is not whether there was injury or not to the parties, but instead, was there any unlawful touching without consent between the parties?
So battery doesn't require a WWE label violence?
No, Your Honor. Honestly, even small touching can amount to battery if consent is absent.
To establish battery in tort, there are three key elements, which is the first one, intentional touching, the second one, direct physical touch, and also there is unlawful reason to do a battery. Now, if the touching is inappropriate and intentionally, the battery also is arise even without bruises and physical injury.
So we need to refer to the case of Wilson against Pringle.
The defendant argued that he engaged in a horseplay with the plaintiff, who argued that he had damaged his hip due to it, which is both parties were schoolboys. And court held that it did not amount to battery as horseplay was considered acceptable behavior for students of the age. But in this case, the action of the parties who touched someone's private part is not considered as acceptable behavior, same like in this case of Wilson against Springers.
So next is the case of Tiong Pik Yong and Wong Siu Jiu.
So, in this case, the defendant scratched the plaintiff's body out of jealousy of the relationship between the plaintiff and her husband. However, the court held that it did amount to battery as her jealousy is not a lawful reason to inflict force on the plaintiff. Applying the rule to this situation, the passenger allegedly touched the flight attendant's bottom while she was carrying out her duties on board the aircraft. Although the passenger claimed that he only lightly touched or lightly tapped her and argued that it should not be considered serious misconduct. Battery does not require force to be strong or violent. The key element here is whether there was intentional physical contact without the victim's consent.
Moving on to the second element of battery, which is inflicting direct force towards the plaintiff. As compared to assault, in battery, you need to prove that there was, in fact, direct physical force towards the plaintiff, such as any punches, kicks, scratches, or even any form of hitting towards the plaintiff. Furthermore, in the case of Ahmad Azhar bin Osman against Rozana binti Misbun from the year 2021, the material facts state that the plaintiff or the wife had sued her then husband or the defendant for the tort of battery. What basically happened between them is that the husband had hit the wife on multiple occasions, such as inside of their own home, as well as public locations such as a reception counter and a car park. After the wife had brought the case to court, the judgment here is that the Sessions Court had found in favor of the wife, awarding her 30,000 ringgit in general damages and 50,000 ringgit in aggravated damages. However, after that, the husband had appealed the decision because he had already been brought to court for a criminal case, and he was wondering why the wife could bring the case into a civil court under torts. However, on appeal, the decision here is that the court had dismissed the husband's appeal against the wife's claim for battery. This is because the court affirmed that there were three incidents constitute battery because the wife had proved that there was an act using direct physical contact between the husband and the wife, as well as the civil and criminal courts being independent of each other. And now, in order to apply the second element of battery in the present case or in the present news, is that the witness herself as well as other witnesses has said that the defendant had lightly touched the bottom of the plaintiff or the victim. Therefore, there really was direct touch or physical force inflicted in the present case.
The third element of battery is that the contact must be made without lawful justification or consent. This means that the defendant must not have any legal excuse for making the physical contact. For example, a doctor performing a medical examination with a patient consent will have a lawful justification. However, in Malaysia Airline incident, the issue here is whether the flight attendant consented to the alleged touching. If the touching was intentional and occurred without the flight attendant consent, there will be no lawful justification for the contact. Therefore, if the allegation is proven, this third element of battery may be satisfied because the contact would have been made without any consent or any legal excuse.
Students, let's now look at the journal article from the IIM Law Journal. The article is There a Private Right to Privacy in Malaysia? Discuss the importance of personal autonomy and individual dignity. In simple terms, autonomy means that every person has control over his or her own body and personal space. As a law student, you should understand that the tort of battery is not only concerned with physical injury. The law also protects a person's right to be free from unwanted physical interference. This is why consent plays a very important role in battery cases. If a person intentionally touches another without consent, the law may regard that act as an infringement of personal autonomy. Therefore, the journal supports the principle that even where no physical injury occurs, unwanted touching may still give rise to liability in battery. So remember this for your examinations. Battery is not about how hard the touch was, it's about whether the touching was intentional and whether the other person consent to it. So, in conclusion, our group submits that if the allegations are proven and the touching was intentional and non-consensual, the passenger may be liable for battery under tort law. This is because battery does not necessarily require force, injury or violence. The key issue here is unwanted physical contact without consent. To resolve similar situation in the future, our group believes airlines should strengthen safety policies for cabin crew and passenger by ensuring immediate reporting system and strict action against inappropriate conduct. Therefore, legal protection of bodily autonomy remains important to ensure respect, safety, and professionalism in public transportation.